There's not a lot of obvious signs of insulin resistance. So like difficulty losing weight, frequent carb and sugar cravings, rising blood pressure is often an early sign of insulin resistance, rising blood sugars, obviously. But if you're struggling to lose weight and you don't know your insulin levels, I highly suggest getting those checked. 88% of adults in America have some degree of insulin resistance. So it's very prevalent, very common, and very overlooked by physicians.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today I'm really excited to share our time with Dr. Morgan Nolte. She's a board-certified clinical specialist in geriatric physical therapy. Recognizing a lack of preventive education and care that focused on reversing risk factors instead of just treating symptoms, Dr. Nolte founded Zivi. This is an online course and coaching program that helps adults reverse insulin resistance for long-term weight loss and disease prevention. We dive into all things insulin resistance and provide a ton of valuable information. Dr. Nolte, welcome to the show. I'm so excited for our time together.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I would love for you to start by sharing your personal journey with us. What inspired you to become a board-certified clinical specialist in geriatric physical therapy? And I would love for you to share how your experiences have shaped your perspective toward health and wellness.
Yeah, so I went into geriatrics just to pay it forward to my grandparents. I was really close to my grandparents. I got a lot out of our relationship. I think that when you hang out around older people, you get values that you don't necessarily get when you hang out with your peers or, parents aren't cool at that age. So, values like hard work and fidelity and faith and family and generosity. My grandpa was a physician. He was a radiologist, and he always just spoke very fondly of his time as a physician. And so I knew I wanted to go into the medical field to kind of pay it forward and help other people, especially grandparents, age well, be healthy so that they could be there for their grandkids like mine were there for me, and have that ripple impact on the next generation. So that was really important to me, was to help aging adults be healthy so they can be there for their kids and their grandkids, because I think that's really important. I think family values are very important in today's society. So that was what drew me to geriatrics. And then I was quickly jaded once I was actually working in the field, because I was working with a lot of people in their 70s or 80s or 90s who had multiple comorbidities. So diabetes, heart disease, dementia, obesity, a lot of falls, a lot of osteoporosis. And I quickly realized that all of these kind of have a common etiology in insulin resistance. So if you kind of trace everything back to what is the core here, like what's going on, it comes down to unhealthy habits that lead to insulin resistance. And I describe insulin resistance as like the root system that can manifest into different diseases based on your genetics and lifestyle. So the most common ones that I saw were diabetes, heart disease, and dementia. Rarely did someone have just one, if ever. Always if you're reviewing a history and physical, you see high blood sugar, high blood pressure, altered cholesterol, like this triad. And so it was pretty obvious to me that there had to be a common underlying etiology. But in traditional medicine, they're trained to practice in silos. You go to your cardiologist for your heart condition and they give you blood pressure medications. You go to the endocrinologist for your diabetes and they give you blood sugar medications. You might go to a neurologist for your cognitive impairment issues, and they unfortunately a lot of times don't have a lot of ways to help. It's more just tracking the steady decline. And so that wasn't good enough for me. I thought I went into this field to help people, and I think I'm doing too little, too late, too often. And that was just too heartbreaking for me to continue working in that situation when I felt like God was calling me to work in a preventative capacity. So I debated a long time on, do I want to go to registered dietitian school? Do I want to get my PhD? How do I want to move forward in a way that I feel like serves people at my highest capacity to help them age well? Like my whole purpose of going into geriatrics. And I landed on just doing the independent research and starting my own, health consulting business, focused specifically on helping people live a low insulin and inflammation lifestyle to kill the most birds with one stone. Really, if we want to prevent as many things as possible, I think that's the simplest way to go about doing it.
Well, I completely agree with you. Everything we do
Yeah.
at PhD is the same. Like, how do we reverse these comorbidities? All of these conditions are coined as chronic progressive diseases. And you and I both know that it doesn't have to be that way. And we can make
Mm-mm.
dramatic positive change through simple steps. But, a lot of our listeners here have heard me talk a lot about insulin and insulin resistance. I think there's always a lot more to learn and to get different philosophies on. I would love for you to share with us a simplified explanation of what insulin is, how insulin resistance happens, and why you believe there's such a prevalent struggle with it in the US for our adults and really now our kids.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So we're both pretty young moms too. So I
Yeah.
appreciate bringing the kids into the situation. But let's start with insulin. It's a hormone made by your pancreas, essential for survival. If you question that, just look at a type 1 diabetic. They don't make their own insulin, and it used to be a fatal condition called the wasting disease. So a type 1 diabetic who didn't make any insulin, they could eat and eat and eat and still not gain weight because insulin acts as the key to unlock your cells to let the nutrients in, to let the food into your cells to nourish your body. So we do need insulin. Once people could inject their own insulin, type 1 diabetes was no longer a fatal condition. So the problem comes when we have too much insulin in our system for too long. It's an inflammatory hormone. It causes some hormone dysregulation in the brain related to weight and specifically body fat regulation. So when we have elevated levels of insulin, similar to elevated levels of an antibiotic or alcohol in your system, your body becomes resistant to its effect. So insulin normally helps control your blood sugars, right? But when you become insulin resistant, you lose the ability to successfully control your blood sugars. And by the time you're pre diabetic or you have type 2 diabetes, you most certainly have insulin resistance. But a lot of people don't understand that fasting insulin levels can predict type 2 diabetes 10, 15, even sometimes 20 years before fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C. So we both have that passion for disease prevention. So that's where insulin comes into the conversation is if you're checking your fasting insulin levels and it's not in the optimal range, then you're on your way to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And the problem with conventional medicine is so many physicians don't see the value in checking insulin because it's not necessarily used as a diagnostic tool. There's not like a cutoff for, oh, you have prediabetes if your insulin is at this level, or type 2 diabetes, like we do for blood sugar and A1C levels. Like there's strict cutoffs for now you're in the pre diabetic range, now you're in the diabetic range. And so it's not really used to prescribe medications in that sense. So I think a lot of times physicians view their role as diagnose and prescribe, not necessarily educate and empower. And that's where both of us want to fill the gap in this preventative medicine space is we want to educate and empower our patients and our clients and our members to achieve and maintain optimal health, which is not happening in your physician's office.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the primary role of insulin is proper blood sugar and body fat regulation. And then insulin resistance happens over time when the levels are stimulated too high for too long. And some of the most common causes of that are a diet high in refined sugars, refined flours. And the reason for that is that those refined carbohydrates will spike your blood sugar levels. And insulin's job is to move the blood sugar into your cells for storage because your body doesn't like that blood sugar to spike up. It wants to keep it pretty steady. That's what insulin's job does. So if you're constantly, like if you're waking up and you're having a bowl of Special K, which is primarily refined carbohydrates, your insulin and blood sugar are spiking in the morning. And then let's say mid-morning, you're having, some coffee with some peppermint mocha creamer. That used to be my favorite. I was getting 20 grams of added sugar just from my coffee creamer every day because I'd have 2 tablespoons and 2 cups. So that's about as much as a Snickers bar in my coffee every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have, maybe a lean pocket for lunch and a Cliff Bar, which a Cliff Bar has as much sugar as a Snickers again. And then at night, I might have some bread on the side or a roll or rice and just kind of carbohydrates throughout the day. And I'm certainly not carnivore. I'm not keto, but I like to say, understand your food and understand the blood sugar and insulin impact your food will have. And it makes it so much easier to make healthy choices. So that's one thing is a diet high in refined and processed carbohydrates. The second biggest thing, well, there's a couple other things. I like to think of them as pillars, as I'm sure you've taught people too, nutrition, physical activity, stress, sleep. And so physical activity is another one. We're working more desk jobs. My husband's a farmer. He's active all the time. I don't think he'll ever have a weight problem in his entire life because he burns it all off. So this is really important. You know how I said when your blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up to let the glucose into the cells. Well, the other thing that can let that glucose into the cells is movement, muscle demand. So insulin and then muscle demand are the two ways that energy can get into your cells. So the more active we are, the better your blood sugar regulation and the lower your risk for insulin resistance. The third thing then is stress. And this becomes very important in midlife, especially as women go through menopause. Your adrenal glands produce your stress hormones. The cortisol is a primary stress hormone. But when your ovaries stop producing estrogen, then the adrenal glands and your adipose or fat tissue actually picks up some of the slack there. And so if you're stressed out, your fat tissue becomes even more valuable real estate to produce that estrogen. And so that's a double-edged sword there, because not only can your adrenals have a lower estrogen, they can't help out the fat tissue as much, but also cortisol, when it's elevated, will raise your blood sugars, because that's part of its job. Is if we were fighting or fleeing a situation, we need energy for our muscles. And so cortisol is released, the blood sugar is released into our bloodstream so that our muscles can soak it up. But if the stress is from an aging parent or a stressful job and you're not moving your body to soak up that extra glucose, guess what? More insulin has to be released. That's another contributor to chronically elevated levels of insulin is chronic stress. So especially in midlife, it becomes very important to manage stress. And then the last pillar is sleep. So a lot of, especially going through menopause, if you're having hot flashes at night, or maybe you're getting up more frequently to go to the bathroom, or just sleep in general can be a little bit more challenging, but it's important because sleep deprivation does a couple things. It's a chronic stress on your body. So over time, it's going to raise cortisol, but it also affects your satiety and hunger hormones. So after a poor night of sleep, we're going to notice a higher appetite and lower levels of satiety or fullness following a meal. So when we're talking about insulin resistance, this is just the physical part. And I'd love to discuss a little bit more of a holistic approach too. Those would be the 4 physical pillars of your body. Like what your body needs is proper nourishment, it needs proper sleep, it needs proper stress management, and it needs good movement. And that's really the cornerstones for controlling insulin levels. But we can get into this a little bit later. I just kind of wanted to plant the seed here. In my opinion, that's only one bucket of ourselves. Like that's our physical body, but we also have a mental aspect of ourselves, an emotional aspect of ourselves, and a spiritual aspect of ourselves. And the problem with making some of these lifestyle changes, in my opinion, is that people are often chronically stressed, dissatisfied with their career or their relational lives or their financial state. And maybe they're experiencing some anxiety or depression and they want to feel better. Who doesn't want to feel good? And so they're using food or alcohol or substances to make themselves feel better. But the problem is that's hurting their physical health. So they're kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul in their own body. And so part of getting healthy is really honoring every single aspect of our lives so that we stop using food or alcohol or substances as a coping mechanism and start learning better alternatives to fill those emotional and mental and spiritual buckets so that this whole process can be a little bit more enjoyable. Because frankly, if you don't have a strong mindset, that's kind of the mindset aspect of it. And I say, the physical pillars are built on a strong mindset foundation. And if you don't have that, then your pillars will fall over if a storm comes. It's like build your house on the rock versus build your house on the sand. And we really want to have a firm foundation of good mental, spiritual, and emotional health so that as we start to make these physical changes, we can do so more successfully, especially because life happens. Like children get sick, parents get sick, job changes, maybe you're moving or remodeling, and we have to figure out a way to like stay steady through the storms and be consistent with our habits, because that's the ultimate goal. Like we want people to be healthy forever. We want them to have such a high quality of life. And if you're just jumping from one quick fix or one diet to the next, and you're not really working on that foundation of your house, you're not working on those pillars, your results won't last. That's not the goal. I speak as we because I know how aligned we are on things. The goal is not to lose weight. Like the goal is to lose weight and keep it off and get healthy. And there's a huge difference. And if we begin with that end in mind, then the whole strategy changes and it becomes a little bit more gentler, compassionate, exploratory, curious process instead of like, I have to lose this weight by this day so I fit into this dress and otherwise I'm going to feel like a failure. Like there's just when you have that type of growth mindset, it's such a more enjoyable process. And I think the best analogy that I've thought of for this is like if you're building a dream home, do you want it to be done in 3 to 6 months? Like, absolutely not. You would have all sorts of questions for your contractor. You'd be like, are you sure that that's a quality job? Or when a hailstorm comes or when a heavy wind comes, is your roof going to blow off? Like, no. Think of your healthy habit as your dream house, like you're building your dream life, and it's going to take time and it's going to take planning and it's going to take work and it's going to take a team. And that is okay. And I think part of the issue that we have such an epidemic of insulin resistance is because we have unrealistic expectations about what it takes to really get and stay healthy. We have glorified it in social media. There are quick fix approaches marketed everywhere. And so we're feeding people these unrealistic expectations because that's what sells. Like lifestyle habits, that's not very sexy. Just like being real, like getting healthy is not necessarily a sexy endeavor. And it's not necessarily an easy or always enjoyable endeavor, but it can be one of tremendous personal growth and development. And I think that's very satisfying if you have the right mindset. So just in case people don't know, if they're listening to that and they're like, oh gosh, like, well, I wonder if I'm insulin resistant. I think it's important to check it. So an optimal fasting insulin level is less than 6, and we sell insulin tests right through our website. If you're in California, Maryland, or New York, there's different state regulations. So if you live in California or Maryland, you're still going to need a doctor's order. And if you live in New York, you have to go through a different system because they have their own little mini rules and regulations. But check your insulin. You don't always have to have your doctor on board unless you live in those 2 states I mentioned. But you can, like, it's very important to recognize here, you can have normal blood sugar or A1C and still have elevated insulin. So that's a point I don't want people to miss. There's not a lot of obvious signs of insulin resistance. So, like difficulty losing weight, frequent carb and sugar cravings, rising blood pressure is often an early sign of insulin resistance, rising blood sugars, obviously. But if you're struggling to lose weight and you don't know your insulin levels, I highly suggest getting those checked. 88% of adults in America have some degree of insulin resistance. So it's very prevalent, very common, and very overlooked by physicians. The other thing that's important to recognize is you don't have to be obese or even overweight to have insulin resistance. One research study found that about 12 to 14% of people at a normal weight, like at least that much, can still have insulin resistance. So it's called thin on the outside, fat on the inside, or TOFI. And if we're checking insulin levels, that's one way that we can maybe perhaps check that, because you can't always see it from a BMI or even a waist circumference. So know your insulin levels, and that will really help you understand your risk for disease.
Wow, you just answered so many of my questions all in a row. That was amazing. Yeah. So, okay. So, fasting insulin levels, you can go to your doctor, ask for them to test it, but you don't necessarily need to do that. You
Yep.
can purchase a test and do it on your own.
Yep.
Anything above a 6 is considered not good.
Yep.
And so if, let's say, your doctor doesn't test it, you purchase this test on your own, it comes back and your levels are higher than a 6, then what do you do? And what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I just wanted to point something out really quick from a testing standpoint. Ours is an at-home test. So you order it and then you prick your finger and you send it to the lab. Right now it's $70, but you can get an even like a more affordable test if you go to testing.com or walkinlab.com and then you order it, but then you go into a lab like LabCorp or Quest if you have one that's pretty close to you, and that's maybe like $20 to $30.
Wow.
But I live in rural Nebraska, so I really wanted to find a solution for people like me who it's like it's going to
Mm,
cost us just as much in gas as it is to like buy the
yeah.
test. So there are a couple of options there to test it. And then if it's high, we have a couple of great resources. On YouTube, we have an insulin resistance for beginners playlist, and that
Mhm.
walks people through, testing, signs and symptoms, proper diet for insulin resistance. We also have a free ultimate food guide that breaks down macronutrients, and I can do that here too. But if they want like a PDF download,
Mhm.
they can check out our website, or you can link it up, whatever you want. And that gives kind of tables for foods that are good for insulin levels and foods that aren't. So the
Mhm.
first thing that I recommend, um, well, okay, I'm going to give people what they want to hear, and then I'm going to tell them what they
Okay.
need to hear. So those would be the first things that I would recommend is start educating yourself, watch that playlist, download the free guide. It's all free stuff. So the next thing is pay attention to your water intake. So I know that this sounds very simple, but in our program, we have something called our Zivi habit hierarchy. And the first two habits are related to mindset. Like
Mhm.
you got to be doing a daily mindset routine. And in my opinion, this is the lowest hanging fruit because you're priming your brain for the behaviors that you want. And we have this entire great process. I think you have a similar process as well
Yeah.
about like creating that wellness vision for yourself. What's your gratitude? What are your
Mhm.
three, like 1 to 3 action items for the day to prevent overwhelm? What barriers could arise today? Like, we just want to be very clear about what does success look like today? How are you
Mhm.
recognizing your wins today? And the reason that I'm so passionate about that is it's free. It takes 5 to 15 minutes. It takes zero physical effort and it primes your brain for the rest of the day.
Mhm.
So if you can do something that's free and easy and quick every morning, you're going to be more likely to do the more challenging things that it might feel like to get healthy, right? So that's like our first domino. Then we suggest a weekly meeting for accountability, like make 1 to 3 goals a week. And we typically recommend it in this order. So that daily mindset routine is the first goal, and then the weekly meeting, and then water and sleep are the next two. So half your body weight in ounces of water a day is preferred. Um, I'm very shocked. I don't know about you, but like I'm always a little bit shocked how many people aren't getting that. Do you hear that a lot from your members or clients?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't really enjoy the taste of water. So yeah, I was talking to a fellow yesterday and he said that he trained himself to learn to love water. So for some people, yeah, it just takes effort to get there. I think because of the way we've been eating all the sweet foods that we generally processed foods change our palate. So when we taste natural foods, even just plain water, it just doesn't taste good to us. And for some people, it takes a little bit of a learning curve to get that and that love for water back, but it comes back
Yeah.
most of the time.
It does. And there are ways around that too. I think everybody's opinions on sugar substitutes are different. I think
Mhm.
mine are they're better than sugar. So like the
Yeah,
LMNT electrolytes have really delicious flavors
they
sweetened with
do.
stevia, which is one of the healthier options.
Right.
So if that's an option for them, they can do that. But water, I'm always shocked how many people come back and they're like, "Wow, I'm drinking more water and it really is making a difference." Like even
Mhm.
yesterday, someone's had a knee replacement in the past,
Mhm.
and that like drinking a lot of water has really helped with that post-surgical pain. I was like,
Yeah.
great, that's great. So water, sleep. So we want 7 to 9 hours a night. I have a really great YouTube video on 15 tips to get better sleep.
Mhm.
But the primary one that I usually suggest is amber colored blue light blockers,
Yeah.
1 to 2 hours before you want to be asleep. That really blocks the cortisol that the blue light from phones
Mhm.
and iPads and TVs stimulates. And when your cortisol is up, your melatonin can't come up, your
Mhm.
sleepy hormone. And so when we can block that with blue light blockers, melatonin can go up naturally and you're going to fall asleep faster, stay asleep better. They're $30 on Amazon. It's well worth the investment.
Mhm.
So that's another recommendation that I give right away. If you find that you have these elevated levels of insulin, um, educate yourself, but then first focus on sleep and water because when you get those two pillars or like habits in place, the dietary habits come a little bit easier. So the next thing that we focus on is protein. A lot of people, I said, okay, well, what's one thing that causes insulin resistance? A lot of refined starches and sugars.
Mhm.
So many people just right away like want to cut all sugar from their diet. And that's okay if you want to do that. But I think that sometimes that leads to that all or nothing mindset.
Yeah.
And we like more of an all or moderate mindset. And it's easier to be all or moderate when um, you're sleeping and you're well hydrated and your mindset's in the right place. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that we don't want to reduce the sugar and the carbs and stuff like that. We just think it's easier if you have sleep, water, and protein in place first so that you have fewer sugar cravings in the first place. From a protein standpoint, our ideal or our goal is 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. That's really the only time I use a BMI chart. So someone might weigh 250 pounds, and in their mind, their ideal weight might be 170, but on like a BMI chart, that may still be in the overweight category for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only time that I'd be like, look at your height, find like the healthy range for your weight, and that's a good way to help estimate your protein needs. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably closer to like 120 to 150 grams a day. That's like far, far more than so many people are eating. And so a starter goal for that is just to get 30 grams per meal of high quality protein. And that's really to support your muscle mass, because the more muscle we have, the greater our insulin sensitivity. So the less insulin we need. So our approach really focuses a lot on building and maintaining lean muscle mass as you lose weight, and then also during weight loss maintenance, because
Mm-hmm.
the two ways to do that during weight loss are adequate protein and resistance training. And exercising in general, that will really help prevent that metabolic slowing that's so common with weight loss, which is why weight regain is so common. So we heavily emphasize protein, 30 grams per meal. The food guide that I mentioned has tables where it's like it'll go through chicken and steak and eggs and Greek yogurt and all of these different foods, and then give you like how much you have to eat to meet that 30 gram of protein threshold. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I recommend that guide as like an adjunct resource to this conversation to make it easy to see, okay, how can I combine different foods to get that goal? And then from there, we like the fiber goal. So women aim for 25 grams of fiber a day, men for 35. It averages about 10 per meal. And again, that protein and fiber combination is excellent for blood sugar regulation, and it's also going to help reduce sugar cravings. So then from there, we transition into like reducing the added sugars, transitioning to like focusing a little bit more on exercise and physical activity and optimizing that, transitioning to more of a whole foods diet. So that's kind of the order of operations that we like to run on, just because from my experience from coaching, if you go out of order of those, it's just a little bit harder and you end up having to backtrack to make it easier anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So the hardest thing about that approach is like getting your mindset right about, okay, you're not going to see instant results. This isn't going to happen fast. You have to tame that brain, because I think a lot of the people that we work with come from that Weight Watchers background where it's like you're weighing in every week. And if you're not losing a half pound to a half, like to a pound a week, you're led to feel like you're failing or you're not trying hard enough. And that's not the case. So
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of rewiring, I think, is helpful. But that's like if someone has elevated insulin levels, that would be the course that I would recommend for them.
When we get to the carbohydrate intake, do you have a specific amount that you target? I look and I love how you said you're not keto or Atkins, and I find that the reason why we talk about carbohydrates is not because they're evil, but it's
Yeah.
because they have the most profound stimulus on how we metabolize all other nutrients. So if people do eat that special K breakfast, then they're basically flipping off the switch to burning fat for fuel for a pretty long time. So they're just pretty powerful in how they switch our metabolism from fat burn to sugar burn. So do you have a specific amount that you suggest? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll give you a general answer and then a little bit more specific. We usually recommend people start around 80 to 90 grams of net carbs a day, depending on where they're starting. So if they're
Mm-hmm.
already eating less than that, we're typically not going to recommend they eat more than what they're already eating. But if people are in like the 150 to 200 grams of net carbs a day, we want to bring that down to control the blood sugar and insulin response. More importantly than that is going to be the per meal threshold. I think that Levels Health is doing a really good job, and continuous glucose monitor companies, on giving us a little bit better data on how our bodies respond to carbohydrates. So a general recommendation that I would give is no more than 30 grams of net carbs per meal based on my own personal data. And everybody has to find their own ideal level of carbohydrate intake. But according to Levels Health, this is a very, very tight blood sugar regulation. I'd be interested to hear your feedback too. But they recommend that your post-meal glucose response doesn't go above 30. So if you're starting at 90, then after you eat, it shouldn't go higher than 120.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, that's about 30 grams of carbohydrates. It depends on the source. It depends on if I have them first or later in the meal, but like a general rule of thumb. But they also recommend that pretty much at any time, your blood sugar doesn't go higher than like 115 to 120, which is
Mm-hmm.
much tighter than the American Diabetes Association regulation or rule or standard of they want it less than 140 2 hours after you eat. So
Mm-hmm.
that is like pretty high in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So a general rule there is 80 to 90 grams of net carbs as a starting point. See how your body responds to that. That might be a nice maintenance level for people. That might not be tight enough for some people. And then really focusing on that per meal gram of carbohydrate goal of 30 or less. If you're active, you can tolerate a little bit more. So I typically say about 30 extra grams of net carbs a day per hour of intense physical activity. So if you can time those like right before or after you exercise, that's going to be most beneficial because your muscles are already demanding those carbohydrates. It's going to soak it in. There's about a 30-minute golden window after activity where something called your GLUT4 transporters, they hang out in your cell, they come to the cell membrane, they're like a tube slide, and that's how the glucose gets into the cell. And so when insulin binds to its receptor, that GLUT4 transporter comes to the cell membrane and glucose comes in. But the other way that that can come to the cell membrane is exercise. And they stay on the cell membrane about 30 minutes after exercise is done. And so that's like you can eat your carbohydrates, they're going to slide into your muscle glycogen stores without insulin needing to be secreted to do that. So that's my carbohydrate recommendation. But again, some people need tighter than that. And if someone's plant based, then they may be eating more than that. And that's why we start with like everyone needs that protein goal. Like that's going to be the standard. And then carbohydrates, I think, fluctuate a little bit more based on biochemistry, physical activity levels, degree of insulin resistance, those kinds of things. But I'm interested in your opinion on that too. I think you tend to go a little bit lower starting out, is that right? And then kind of
Mm-hmm.
moderate things.
Yeah, usually we might be a little bit less than 80
Mm-hmm.
because I just find in working with people who have really struggled with obesity and metabolic dysfunction, these are all of the folks who we are helping. That we just don't tolerate carbs that well. It really just depends on the individual. If they're coming in with type 2 diabetes or even type 1 diabetes or metabolic dysfunction, then they might be a little bit on the lower range. If
Mm-hmm.
someone's really active, they've got maybe 8 to 20 pounds to drop, then it's a different metabolism in there.
Yep.
Therefore, the way that they're going to eat is going to vary. But I just wore a CGM myself. And you guys, what Dr. Nolte is talking about in how the order of which you eat impacts your glucose, it is so significant.
It
I
is.
was skiing with my kids and moving all day and just exhausted. And I hadn't eaten that much just because I was taking care of all of their skis and boogers and all of the stuff required when you're up on a mountain. And we went to the lodge and there was a cookie. My daughter's like, oh my gosh, I want this cookie. And so I saved her from having all the sugar and split it with her. And I just had, half of a cookie, a small cookie. And my blood sugar shot up to 170. And I
No
was just,
way.
yeah, I was amazed by that. Another thing I had, I'm telling you all of my bad habits. My kids were eating like Mentos. They each had like 3, and I had one all by itself, and I hadn't eaten much that day again. And it shot up to 170 for, I think I had 2 Mentos in a row. So it is unbelievable. And then there was another meal that I had, and I had an Americano with some steamed heavy cream, which is my favorite beverage. And I had some salami and some cheese. And then I had part of a donut, like very small. And my blood sugar went up to 120. And if I had just had the donut by itself, even if small bite, it would have shot up there. And that was after skiing like crazy and being out of my environment, which is why I was eating those things. So I just think it's very interesting how it can shoot up there if we're not careful, if we don't eat in a specific order. So focusing on getting those veggies in, and then your protein and fat, and then the dessert as a dessert at the end of your meal, if you are going to enjoy that, or even your starch or your sweet potato. That's why that Special K with banana and skim milk is like the worst breakfast you
I
can
know.
eat.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's so true.
Unfortunately.
I'm always surprised too, and I love seeing that data.
Mhm.
But the thing is, a lot of people are eating healthy, but it's not good for their like healthy quote in quotes
Right.
healthy. Like the bananas, the apples, the grapes, they're
Mhm.
just eating so much fruit because
Yes.
they've been taught that it was free on Weight Watchers, and
Right.
that is not true. Like once you see the blood sugar impact of these fruits, it's clear that it's not a free food. And so I
No.
think that's kind of part of the misinformation and this outdated belief system that we're really trying to work against and help
Mhm.
people unlearn some things that they've learned about a sustainable weight loss. The blood sugar monitor, I think, is interesting. And another big takeaway that I had is just walking after a meal for 5,
Mhm.
10, 15 minutes was so good for my blood sugar response. So in Nebraska, there's this restaurant called Runza's. Have you ever heard of a Runza?
No.
Okay. They're I'd make them with like a sourdough bread type of thing. And
Mhm.
then beef and cabbage and onion in the middle.
Okay.
And one runza has about 60 grams of carbs. So like
Mhm.
double the recommended amount that I
Mhm.
would typically recommend per meal. But if I ate one and I didn't walk, then it was a pretty, significant spike. But then if I walked after a meal, um, it quickly, then I could keep that blood sugar spike lower. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy seeing that instant result, like the instant gratification of seeing the blood sugar go down. So, yeah, it's
Mhm.
not to say never have carbs. It's not to say you
Yeah.
can't indulge sometimes, but it's like usually there's a healthier alternative
Mhm.
um, that is going to be just as enjoyable. And there's always strategies to reduce the blood sugar impact if you do choose to have something that's going to spike your blood sugar.
Mhm. I love that you mentioned Cliff Bar. I was just recording an episode talking about glucose spikes, and I was like, no one needs to eat a Cliff Bar unless you're literally hanging off the cliff and you need a sugar boost to get you up back up onto the mountain and save your life. Other than that, we really don't need a Cliff Bar. It is just like a Snickers bar. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I had them all the time in PT school. I mean, in PT school, I would eat like every 50 minutes. I'm not kidding.
Mhm.
Like because that's how frequently the classes had a break. Go to the bathroom, I'd get some coffee with creamer, I'd get a little Cliff Bar, and I was just like eating all day long. And no wonder I started gaining weight in PT school, but I
Mhm.
didn't know why. I didn't know better then.
Yeah. Oh, well, so will you share with us a little bit about insulin resistance and its effect on inflammation and just overall pain and discomfort in the body? When we have clients come in, they're in a lot of pain, inflammation everywhere, and just within a few weeks, they're like, "Oh my gosh, my knees don't hurt anymore. I can sleep so much better. My neck pain is gone." We had one fellow come in, he was a referral from an orthopedic surgeon locally, and the doctor saw all the work we were doing where folks were coming in dropping this weight and didn't need surgery, and this fellow had knee pain, just severe arthritic knee pain, and thought he would need surgery. Came in, and within 6 weeks his knee pain was gone. Can you talk about how that works, because it's obviously related to inflammation and insulin? How are the two tied together?
Yeah, so they kind of drive each other. So high levels of insulin can cause inflammation, and high levels of inflammation are a stress on the body. So that'll
Mm-hmm.
release cortisol, which will raise insulin levels. So they do kind of feed each other, unfortunately. But we see the same thing. Like when people adopt a low insulin and a low inflammation lifestyle, their pain really does go down. There was this one lady with fibromyalgia who had chronic pain for years, like after the holidays, she was bedbound for days.
Yeah.
And she changed to a pretty ketogenic approach on her own. Like I said, it's like everyone's going to be
Mm-hmm.
different. And she said after 3 days of changing her diet, she woke up without pain. And then her next thought was, am I dead? Because she was so used to having the pain.
Yeah.
And so she was 61 when she won a 5K for her age
Oh, that's
division.
amazing.
It's amazing. And so when people really feel disempowered about their pain, or they're suffering because they're taking a lot of pain medications and it's affecting their cognition and their energy and maybe their bowels, it's like there's a better alternative, but it's not as easy as taking a pill. And so I think
Mhm.
that recognize the trade-off there, but a lot of people don't realize that insulin resistance affects your joint health. Like I'm a physical therapist, and one of my work colleagues and friends is a osteoarthritis specialist. And she found it was really interesting because there's chondrocytes and synovial sites that like make up your joint. So the
Mhm.
chondrocytes are kind of what lines the bones to make them smooth. And then the synovial sites are what creates like the grease inside of the joint to also help it run smooth. And when those cells become resistant to insulin, instead of producing the matrix to make the bone smooth, or the gelatinous substance in the joint to make it run smooth, they create inflammatory compounds that actually break the joint down.
Mm.
And so we really want to control both insulin and inflammation levels in the whole body, and you will
Yeah.
see results for systemic results.
We talk a little bit about diet recommendations, protein, carbs, finding our unique carbohydrate tolerance level. I was looking on your great Instagram page, and you talk a lot about intermittent fasting. How does that play in? And then I thought one thing that was interesting, I saw you mention unflavored electrolytes.
Yeah.
Is that for a specific reason? Are you thinking that when we fast, there should be no flavor in our no sugar electrolytes as well? So I'd love if you could speak to both of those things.
Yeah, so from a fasting perspective, we typically, again, I think pretty much in line with everything else that I've said, take a gentler, softer approach and recommend everyone fast 12 to 14 hours a day and on an ongoing basis. So that could be like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. That forces you to cut that late night snacking habit. And I think
Mhm.
that's a great first intermittent fasting goal. Some people might want to stay there. Some people may need to extend that fast to like a 16 or an 18-hour window to really progress their weight loss. And if you're going to do that, we recommend like 2 meals a day, maybe a high protein snack. But when you're not eating, your blood sugar and your insulin levels have a chance to kind of drop even below their normal baseline. And it
Mhm.
helps bring down the overall averages. It just helps. Like it does help with weight loss. But again, intermittent fasting, it's one of our habits in the hierarchy, but it's a little bit later on because we want you to be sleeping well before you progress your fasting. Otherwise, you're kind of adding one stress on top of
Mhm.
another, which can be a little bit counterproductive for weight loss. We also want you to be hydrated. I saw a stat once that it was like about 75% of the fluid that we take in a day is during meals. And so if we don't have that hydration habit in place, and then we start fasting, you could get dehydrated and experience like headaches or lightheadedness, or dizziness. And so that's where electrolytes can come in. Electrolytes are essential minerals that we typically get from food. But if you're not eating a meal to keep the blood sugar and the insulin down, then you're not getting them from regular water. And you're going to want to supplement with electrolytes. I typically recommend if you're fasting longer than like, I think if you're going 16 hours a day, then that's a good place to take electrolytes.
Yeah.
That's my personal preference. I don't know if you have any other suggestions there. The unflavored is, again, another personal preference, but here's why. I have noticed that when I have flavored electrolytes, my fast is harder. So, stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, allulose, all of these sugar substitutes, they'll still cause what's called a cephalic phase insulin response. So, even though they don't directly raise your blood sugar levels, the sweet taste on your tongue triggers your brain to think that calories are coming in. And so it gives this little pulse of insulin. That cephalic phase means like head phase insulin response.
Mhm.
So insulin is being released, and then that drops your blood sugars just ever so slightly. And when those blood sugars drop, then sometimes that will trigger you to want to eat. So for
Mhm.
me personally, um, it's not that I don't do the flavored electrolytes. If I do, I know that I may be facing some hunger later and some more sugar cravings later. Another really simple tip there is like collagen in coffee.
Yes.
So I'm not necessarily a clean, fast kind of gal, but
Mhm.
once in a while I'll do collagen in my coffee. And I was doing the chocolate collagen and some cinnamon and some half and half in my coffee. And I thought, "Ugh, I'm just kind of like craving sweets a little bit more than I want to." And then it's like, well, duh, why don't you just use the unflavored collagen? That's what
Mhm.
I do a lot of times now is in the morning, especially, I'll just put the unflavored collagen in there. So I think from an electrolyte standpoint, the only reason that I suggest the unflavored is really for that. It's because it's going to make the rest of your fast experience probably easier.
Mhm.
But if you're one of those people that you're like, oh, I hate the taste of plain water, then go for it. The trade off's
Yeah.
probably worth it for you.
Yeah. So if you want to do a true fast, a clean fast, it's less than 50 calories. So you wouldn't be able to do that collagen, and
No.
taking in electrolytes would be helpful. And if you
Yes.
do that and you have flavored electrolytes and you're just craving food, the next time you could try unflavored electrolytes to see if that makes a difference. Those are great
Yeah.
tips.
Yep. And
Hmm.
it's not necessarily to say too that we don't ever recommend anything longer than a 16-hour fast. We
Hmm.
do. But I think that I usually reserve that for like a plateau breaker or a once a week reset. I really personally like the 7-1 or the 5-1-1 method for weight loss. That's how I lost my baby weight. So 5 days a week, I would fast for like no longer than 16 hours. And then one day a week, I would have 3 meals a day. And then one day a week, I would fast for like 20 to 22 hours, have one meal a day. So I did that. But in hindsight, like I wasn't breastfeeding for very long. I couldn't breastfeed my daughter for very long. So if you're breastfeeding, then those fasting recommendations would be different. So
Yeah.
the other issue is severe insulin resistance. So I'm working with a gentleman right now, and he did take blood sugar medication, but it made him feel so bad, and he just didn't want to take it. So when we started together, his sugars were like in the 300s, and then
Wow.
so we really wanted to bring those down. So he's doing 2 fasts a week that are 36 to 42 hours. So
Wow.
he's doing more of like an alternate day fasting schedule,
Yeah.
which is working really, really well for him to control
Hmm.
those blood sugars a little bit more aggressively.
Hmm.
So I think it's just important to match your fasting with your physiology, with your lifestyle, with your sleep. Like women in perimenopause may not be able to tolerate it as much if their
Yeah.
sleep is disturbed. So I don't think it's a one size fits all fasting protocol. It's understanding the benefits, understanding when you would use different lengths of fasting, and then kind of personalizing it to where you're at right now.
Yeah, I think also understanding that protein is so the key when you're fasting because it's so easy. It's already hard enough to get adequate protein, I think. I mean, every day I have to make it a focus of mine or I
Yep.
shortchange it. And so with fasting, you have a high risk of not getting your protein in and muscle wasting, which we don't want to do. So I think it's getting your protein, understanding that first, and then dabbling potentially in it if you want to open up your toolbox.
I think so too. And a protein sparing fast, I think, is pretty effective as well. So
Mhm.
I kind of consider that like a modified carnivore type of approach. It's
Yeah.
like you're just eating the protein component and you're
Hmm.
fasting from other nutrients. There's so many different, like you said, tools in the toolbox to
Yeah.
throw things at, like a plateau or
Hmm.
whatever. But in my opinion, those are tools. And we really want to find that baseline sustainable lifestyle and then use those tools intermittently to kind of push past a challenge or a plateau.
Yeah, I want to have you back on and we can just talk about plateaus and ways to
That'd be
overcome
good.
because there are so many. So I know our time is coming to an end. I would love for you to share with us where can we find all of these great resources that you talked about? Where can we follow you and get all this amazing information?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me. I love connecting with like-minded people like yourself. Our website's zivli.com, Zivli.com. Ziv means live in Croatian, and then the LI stands for low insulin and low inflammation lifestyle. Our YouTube channel is Dr. Morgan Nolte, Zivli. On Instagram, I'm at Dr. Morgan Nolte. And I just suggest people start with that playlist that I mentioned, that insulin resistance for beginners playlist, and then our free ultimate food guide. And then the other thing is from a weight loss plateau standpoint, I'm excited to come back on.
Yeah.
I really view weight loss plateaus a little bit differently than most. And
Hmm.
we didn't get into the mindset a lot, but I
No.
think that mindset is huge when it comes to plateaus. I categorize them as mental, like circumstantial or physical. And so I think it'd be
Mhm.
really interesting to kind of dig into those plateaus in
Yeah.
another episode. So
Let's do
I'm
it.
looking
Yeah, I
forward to
think
that.
98% of plateaus come from our mind and
Yeah,
mindset. And so that's a
that'll be
total
so
different
fun.
perspective. So that would be so exciting. We'll do that. Thank you
Okay,
so
thank
much,
you.
Dr. Nolte, for coming on the show. We gained so much value. So I really appreciate it.
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to come back.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that was a jam packed episode filled with a lot of great information. I hope you love that. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please follow and leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, please drop any remaining questions or comments that you might have for me or Dr. Nolte. Remember, if you're looking for great electrolytes, We talked a lot about the importance of remaining hydrated, proper hydration, utilizing electrolytes to help us achieve proper hydration in this episode. And that's actually exactly why I made Dr. Ashley's Electrolyte Plus mix, is because consuming adequate electrolytes with your water really helps make the process of weight loss and maintaining weight loss much more painless. So if you're interested in checking out a really great electrolyte mix that helps to stabilize your blood glucose levels as well and helps with insulin resistance, then check out the link in the YouTube description for Dr. Ashley Wellness and receive a discount there. Remember, you've got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. I will see you on the next episode.